Hello, people. Welcome to the Free to Be Bored podcast.
Yay! We'll do the intro again.
Okay.
Welcome to Free to Be Bored podcast, episode 4, with your host Louise, and I'm here with Jimena. Yeah. Here to talk again. This is a talking head podcast where we don't have any agenda pre-call. We allow our own individual experiences to shape what we come here to discuss. And we're going to do exactly that again today in episode 1. So welcome.
Which brings me just to comment on something you said, and I was like, is it true that we don't have an agenda? I feel like my agenda is to be loved. There's always the being loved agenda, right? Even though we know it or we don't know it. And I said it because it relates to being pulled into other people's stories. Because most of the time, it's like whenever we are sharing a story, it's like to bring other people into our reality. So from that, pulling them in, the result can eventually be love. I might be wrong, but I'm making a huge generalization here, obviously.
I'm here for the generalization because I would never have said that the underlying agenda is to be loved, but there's part of me that's the entire agenda.
Being alive.
Being loved, or being alive, yeah. Well,
the entire agenda of being alive is, or maybe not being loved, but being loved, which also is like being loved. It's like it just moves in every direction.
Yeah, there's a couple of underlying agendas. We're trying to be as structure free as we can, but there's always these underlying needs of ours to be seen and to be heard and to be understood and to be loved and to love and to be alive. So yeah, no, you're spot on. You're spot on. And I was slightly embarrassed when it came up. I was like, not me, but yeah, 100%. 100%. Please watch this and love us. But
like that's the thing about agendas, right? And I'm already going on a tangent here, but it's like most of the times our agendas are not that conscious. Like we always speak about agenda as this malicious thing that people like kind of conspire to create. It's like, oh, they have a hidden agenda or blah blah blah. It's like we all have hidden agendas. They're called meeting our needs, meeting like especially our childhood needs, unmet needs. And sometimes we'll know. A few times we will know what the agenda is. And even in the known agendas, there's 1,000 other unknown agendas. And it's shameful to admit it, of course, because it means looking at ourselves and looking at our unmet needs and looking about kind of what you were saying, looking at the story that we go out there sharing in the world to kind of meet this conscious or unconscious agenda that we might have.
We do always have an unconscious agenda because the story that we tell will be edited to suit the audience to make sure that there is love on the receiving end of that and care and needs met. So it's a fluid agenda that we're actually not completely in control of. And I am okay with that because we all do it.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, I do feel quite fascinated about this topic of like getting pulled into other people's stories. And I was sharing with you before the episode, like I just finished watching this TV show on Netflix about these brothers that murdered their parents, and it's based on a true story. And it was very interesting to see like this pull towards like a story that will inevitably, I think maybe there's a very human part of it of like wanting to take sides, because there's just like a safety that comes with it, right? So like we are always telling stories, and somehow there's a subtle manipulation, again, conscious or unconscious, that is happening through the stories we tell to get someone to come see the world from our perspective, to come understand us, to come like see our needs and all of that. And the conclusion, or not the conclusion, but I was noticing in myself as I was watching this show, it's like it starts with the premise of them telling you the story of these monsters that killed their mom and their dad. And obviously from that perspective is kind of the expectation is that you will come to hate these creatures. But at the end of the story, at the end of the day and at the end of the story, because the narrative is being told kind of from their perspective, there's a part of you that starts getting sucked into their reality. And from getting sucked into their reality, just wanting them to be the ones who thrive. And it's like kind of this incapacity to see everything because you're already sucked into one story of like, oh, these poor brothers, they were abused and blah, blah, blah. Even though there's like this room for interpretation that is left in the TV show, what I found interesting is how this reflects the way that we're constantly relating to people and relating to reality, and how we are always using stories to sort of, like I said, pull people into our own experience of the world. And I don't know what comes up for you as I share all of this and in your own current life experience.
I do know of the story, and I can absolutely connect with everything you said, but there was another show that I watched recently, and it's downtrodden young woman. She's invisible and she's been bullied, and then she turns into a murderous monster. I didn't realize I was rooting for like a little murderous person. And it's fiction, which is nice, that's fine, but it is actually fiction. And I just think it's just really on point, because I've never thought about how I was sucked in, or I don't think I would have gave that any thought before necessarily. But I did. I analyzed it afterwards and was like, I was pulled all over the place. I was like whiplash. Then I felt sorry for this person. Then I was here and I was back with her, and it was like, and I can imagine that show being really, really similar. But what makes it have more impact is it's a true story, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I think what makes it more impactful for me is like to watch my own relationship to it, because it's like just coming from a very rational, like blunt mind. It's like, no, this is wrong. Yes, they're monsters. And then it's just like wanting to always come to a conclusion, right? And then just seeing the parts of yourself that like start, like rooting for the one, like basically, like rooting for the story that has been shared with you. And I'm not saying like there's been some other instances, and obviously it's like, it's what TV shows do all the time. They're manipulating our view towards something. And like, they're very good at doing that. It's like they're pulling you in, so you like have the inner experience, like they touch those places of empathy within yourself, those places of hurt, those places of disgust. So they're like, they're taking you on the entire journey. And then it's like, it's crazy, because even though you can know like that was wrong, there's a part of you that still wishes, but like, oh, but maybe they can get away with it. Like maybe they can go out there and be happy. And I don't even know what I'm getting, because like where I'm getting, because as I'm saying this is like, I realize there's so many layers to it again, of just, like also of just seeing the parts of ourselves that are willing to justify behavior, which is not necessarily only a bad part, right? Because we're like I always say this, like we're multi-dimensional beings. Like we live so much to live. We like so much to live in this black and white reality of like, this person is whether good or bad. If they're good, you can like them and love them. If they're bad, you should hate them and despise them. And it's like, no one is just one of those things. We all have like 1,000 expressions of ourselves, and it's like there are some places of so much shininess, so much purity, so much beauty, and there's some places of like a lot of darkness, a lot of like things that we wouldn't want to have to deal with. So but somehow we're always like treading this narrative towards where we want to place ourselves in the view of the other.
And then it gets really polarized between people when there's an oppositional view. And we did this a lot in hiding. It's like bias. It's almost impossible to remove bias, whether positive or negative, from any experience of another. Like you can have awareness training, you can do computer behavioral training. Harvard one's free, the implicit test is free. Encourage everybody to try it. Actually, we'll probably link that. It just shows like how even when you're conscious with it, it's in there. And even from a positive point of view, like there's a thing called the halo effect. Whereas if someone's story touches you because of a story that you have, unconsciously a halo over their head, which is why you do so many different, to bring it back to HR, but it's why you do so many different layers in the recruitment process. If you're doing a solid job of it, right, is to try and eliminate some of that and have gates to catch where this positive bias comes from. Because say, for example, like there was part of let's use football, part of a football flag, of just the corner of a football flag showing in the back of my video, and I'm there in an interview. That could either massively throw the interviewer, the final decision maker, because they're not a Reds fan, or it could be like this person's got good choices, and like it can even be as basic as that. It doesn't need to be a full-on connection with like a sob story or whatever. But it creates this polarity as well. It's like it's difficult to really gauge if there could be any completely unbiased like mediation or decision making at any point when humans are involved, like even all the way to judges. I get it, there's all these things in place, there's a jury, there's all these different layers that things have to go through before they go to court. There's still a human being, very, very highly trained, diplomatic, of course, but there's still a human factor there. So, and you see how polarized people get when there's an emotive connection of I'm on this team, I'm on that team, and then it's like all of the conscious abilities that we have to move more into the middle and more into a place of connection instead of separation, they kind of go out the window because of the connection to these stories are so emotive that it becomes this against that, like you said. So it's really, really interesting, and it's unusual that we look at ourselves and how we're getting pulled in these places, and without looking at ourselves and understanding where we were and looking back at it, even through a place of curiosity, which we should really all do. It's just completely subconscious at that point. You don't think back, like, why did I choose this rug? You don't really think back on decisions that you made unless there has been an issue with the decision itself. Like, we have no idea why I bought this. I didn't buy this laptop, somebody gave it. But whatever, this lamp. But there will be part of what you said weaved in all the way through that as well, right?
Yeah. No, it's really like my mind kind of starts like having little explosions as I hear this, because it's the two parts, right? Like the part that is aware, like the part that can watch a show and just like find herself like just having so much empathy towards these like violent killers that even wanted them to get away with it, and all of a sudden just being shocked at yourself and be like, how the fuck did that happen? Which is also okay to have compassion, right? It's not like, again, to go into this black or white mentality, but also then realizing like, oh, I've been taken on a journey. And in this journey, my emotions have been played with in order to place me in a specific place, like to bring me to a specific conclusion or to a specific relationship to the facts that have been presented. Which again becomes quite fascinating, because then facts stop being facts. Like we like so much to believe that we can have an actual factual relationship to anything, because we don't. Because our emotions are always coming in place, whether we know it or not, and just like starting to inform us of like what our relationship can be to a certain statement or a certain people or a certain color or a certain situation, right? And again, there's going to be instances like this one where it's like going to be so shocking that all of a sudden you're like, how did that happen? Like, how did I end up rooting for the killers? And there's going to be all these other instances in life where we don't even ask ourselves that question, but we were actually, in a way, and it might sound too intense to say like that, but we were manipulated into a certain perception of something, and in this manipulation, like, there was not really space for how we actually felt about it, because we were just taking on the journey. We were just pulled in through a story.
And you see that in the media, in the massive polarization. I think more about US when I think about this, but it's the global media. There is no factual, like, who determines which one is in fact stating fact? It's biased based on the stories that it can touch in your system, based on it makes you feel good because there's confirmation of how I feel is being written here as true. These are my people. This is where I'm going to align to in the safe place of like same. We all coming from the same place, which is genuinely most of the time a place of good. But like this good can't exist alongside this good because of this side's bad and then this side's bad. Opposing views, right? When if collectively both sides of whatever came together, the good intention is like free, easy, it can easily exist together, but they don't believe that. And then to maintain safety, people who are feeling polarized, so they've got like voting in the US, you've got the red versus the blue. Look how mad the global media go for that, and to think that that's not manipulation in any way, that's just us showing the facts. That's just, you know, good old newsrooms just stating exactly how things are. Well, it's an impossibility. It's a complete impossibility. And of course we're either being manipulated knowingly by whoever releases whatever information in whatever format that they do, or unintentionally, just by similarities and things that we can connect with and confirmations of our own stories that make us feel safe, and then we're going to align with that side. It's such a strange thing that seems to be built into humans at some level. There was I might have to actually look it up, but there was an interesting, really interesting, scientists put, I think they were 8 to 10-year-old children in a house on their own for like a set period of time. And it was boys and girls. And the boys, they just went nuts. They just wrecked the place and just ate cereal and just ate sweets. And like, there was no rules. I think they beat each other up. That's what they did. They just made it this huge, crazy playground, and they absolutely annihilated the house. The girls on the other side, but there was 2 camps. There became 2 camps. The girls on the other side, they created a rota, and they created chores, and they made healthy food, and they cooked, and they used all of the skills that they had. And this isn't any better than the boys. This is just developmental stage of the sexes at this time on an average, right? But the girls, even with their little oasis of like bliss, adult free, we eat what we want, but we know what's good for us. You're doing the floor, like even in that state, there was still a splicing, and there was still a 2-camp status at the end of the experiment. And I just think it's just so interesting. And I think it does actually kind of relate here, because those 2 camps went into the safest area for them, probably based on stories that each of them had told, or maybe I need to be provided for, or I need to be defended in some way if there were stronger personalities than others. But I just found that really interesting. It's like Lord of the Flies.
Truthful.
Yeah.
I think I saw it on Instagram, but I didn't fully get into it. Like just from what you're sharing, different things like start coming to me, and the first one was just like more of a place of light and a place of something beautiful that can come through this realization that it's like so much we love to live in this world of polarization of like me versus you, I'm right, you're wrong, blah 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 blah, all those things. But like when we start to understand these, like this unconscious bias that is happening for all of us at any given time, actually what should awaken, or I mean not should, but what could awaken within each of us is actually entering into a place of compassion. Because it's like the person with the opposing view to yours is having the same unconscious bias to the same thing that you are just in the opposite direction. So it's like you might always think that your decision is more informed, or your decision is like the best one, or the one that understands all the nuances and blah blah blah. It never is, because otherwise it would be including the perspective of the person with the opposing view to yours. So and maybe now that I'm explaining it, I'm not like so much like able to clear what came in my mind, but it was just like, yeah, it was just such a clarity of like, from this actually what comes is it would be more of a place of reconciliation than further polarization, because we come to understand like we think we're in control, we think we're always with the facts, we think we know better, and then what it comes to show is like we never are, and we are all relating to certain things from our own story, like you said, from what makes us feel safe, from what makes us feel belonging, from what makes sense to the makeup that we already have within our system. And then I think like from that place, like some of the harsh judgments that we tend to create towards, again, the opposite view or the opposite perspective could start softening. Just be like, but actually I might not be willing to admit it, but the truth is that I came to this place, to this view, to this perspective from also such an unconscious bias. And so have they. And it's like, why can there not be then from that place an opening to each other?
Exactly. I think my head was exploding over those things that you said, but is the almost inability to see a change of mind as a positive thing. I think there's a lot of weight placed on like, this person has believed this thing for all this time and devoted their life to this one thing, not necessarily like work-wise or career-wise, but like a devotion to a belief. Or, you know, this person really held their own, they haven't flipped and flopped. Like there's a negative, and I know like flakiness has its, I mean, if someone's flaky, it can be irritating to like meet up with them and things. But there's always the other side to that is if someone is believing one thing and then quite easily believing another thing, then believing another thing, there's an open-mindedness there. There's a willingness to be wrong. There's a willingness to say, I've had these beliefs all this time, but I now have slightly different beliefs based on more information. And I think it's the pride in humans to, even faced with new information, sometimes there's a real struggle to take that information in and apply it to what the knowledge already is in their head, and then have a slightly different view, maybe a slightly more open view. There was a huge divide in a global event that we all experienced not too long ago. And it didn't matter which side of the fence you were on, it was extremely violent, both in physical and, you know, verbal, between the two camps. And there was almost no middle ground to be. There was no island in the middle to kind of shoulder both sides and really listen to both sides. It was a rare thing. You needed to be this or that, or you were almost exiled. Like, it became cult-like. It became like that Lord of the Flies thing I mentioned earlier, but on mass scale. And I found that really, really, really interesting to watch. And the self-righteousness through that on both sides. There's no right side here at all, in my opinion. None. It was so fueled. It was fueled by the media. It was fueled by the hatred and the feeling inside of, there's all of these hundreds of thousands or millions of people on my side here. My side is correct. And it was fed through fear. So as soon as the fear was in both camps, because both camps were scared of whatever they perceived to be the threat, fear, the emotion of fear, fueled that need to stick to one side or the other and not even break away to this middle ground to say, how about both sides have a point, or like, how about both sides have humanity in them, and can we raise a hand, like put a hand out from one side to the other?
It's so heavy. And like, again, it's so heavy in the part, like, I mean, I guess what you're referring to is the US election. Might not be. Might be that you're referring to something else. But okay, I was just like superimposing everything you were saying to what has happened with the US election. So you see, like, I already went on my own biased tangent. You may have been spoken about something else. I related to what was available inside of my own consciousness to attach these two, which again is super interesting because we all do that. Like, okay, what within the realm of the known for me can I attach this meaning to? Doesn't matter if it's true, doesn't matter if it's the objective reality or not, is the place of relationship for me. So anyway, in this case, the place of relationship for me was like what happened in the US election, right? And like the incredible polarization that started happening there. And also, yeah, just this enemy mentality that people entered into, of just like, if you did not vote for the person that I vote, you are on the wrong side of history. And basically like having absolutely no space for nuance within this relationship, like no space for the human being to be there. Just like space for your belief to either be reaffirmed and therefore you are an ally, or for your belief to be challenged, therefore you are not to be trusted, I cannot relate to you. And it is really, really insane, because a lot of people that act from like this place are like highly intellectual, highly informed people, right? And even it's always like a lot of people coming to this place of moral superiority. Always this, I know better. I have all the facts. You may know better in some regards, but you don't know the whole story. Clearly, you are not able to relate to the reality of the people that are choosing the other perspective. Otherwise, you would include it in what you are seeing, because, like, again, this idea that just by nature, someone's going to be right and someone's going to be wrong is eliminating our humanity in every interaction, right? Because someone, again, is coming from the bias that was created by their own history, by their own understanding of life. But it's just like such a way in which we eradicate ourselves as human beings. And we just become these like positions, these beliefs, these understandings. And it's just like this very primal thing of just like protect, instead of, hey, but actually, how about I just allow myself to listen to you, not trying to take on your belief, but also not trying to just reject it.
It's like seeking to understand rather than to be right, like seeking to connect rather than teach or serve a lesson. You know, and I think in the largely polarized situations. I wasn't talking about the US election, but it just shows you how generalized this whole concept is, because it applies to any large event. It applies to small events, family, it doesn't matter. Like, it's the same principle, right? It was a couple of years before that, but it had exactly the same effect on populations. And it was really, really interesting psychologically to look at. It was such a mass thing. But yeah, to go back to the, it's not seeking to understand, it is seeking to be right. And there's been like a flip of trying to convince. It's like a state of people feel so unsafe, even in their own beliefs, that they have to have a conversation to gather that person to be on side so that they can feel safer. You know, it's these are all the reasons why you're wrong. These are all the reasons why I'm right. You should come to this side. You know, it's safer over here. You're not safe over there. Those conversations are super, super difficult for anybody to hold. And I get that, because, well, specifically if you use the US election, there's some, I mean, do we do a whole podcast just on that? Like, you're getting to the point of people believing that one side takes the rights away of other side, you know, and that everybody voted for absolutely everything in that, but it leaves no room for individual beliefs. It leaves no room for understanding the other side whatsoever. And I don't think, like, it's not to say that I believe humans connected better in 1908. I don't believe that. I'm just interested now about seeing this on a micro scale in society, in friendship groups and in families, and then it's literally the same thing, just like on a larger scale with whole societies, whole countries. It's the same concept, that separation seems innate to us in some way, or some driving force to create it. What is that? Like, that's why I want to talk about it. It's like, what does it serve?
I mean, I think something that is very interested in this is like, even like going back to how we opened up this conversation, is realizing that most decisions are actually based much more on emotion than on anything else. Like the real decision making happens at the emotional level. And I might be wrong, because we're not scientists, but I think this is proven by science too.
Yeah.
And then we live in a reality that has superimposed like logical thinking to emotion. So it's like we live in a world where the only like valid consensual reality is the one that is presented at the rational level. So there's been such a suppression of the emotional experience of human beings, even though whether we want it or not, is the one in the lead, is the one like just like pushing us in this direction or in that direction. So when there's like such a dissociation or separation or suppression of our emotional reality at a conscious level, and this superimposition of the logical mind, and then just thinking like this is the only valid place from which we can make decisions, there's like everyone is already in a mess within themselves when it comes to relating to anything. Because again, there's already this huge, like massive dimension of themselves that is gone ignored, that is gone pushed down, that is gone rejected, but that is actually like giving our system such valuable information, because also at this level, like so many of our decision making comes from this place of like deep-rooted strategies towards survival. It's like, so it's like whether we want to accept it or not, it's like that's where it's all rooted upon. And then it just has like all these other layers of meaning attached to it. And most people, the reality is it's like they're not recognizing, again, all the layers through which one is moving to make a decision, all the different things that are like being touched upon ourselves to come to A or B conclusion. And we're only acknowledging this very, very important still. I'm not saying like the rational mind is amazing. It has so much to offer. But when it's the only tool, then it really leaves us in a quite vulnerable place And when we're in this vulnerable place, then of course we're going to feel like we need to defend with much more intensity what our view is. Mm-hmm. And then from that, like, it's intense protection, then again comes intense separation. Mm-hmm. Because it's like, again, coming back to a very primal experience that is not able to acknowledge within itself that is what it's all about in its core. Mm-hmm. And it's really crazy, but this part of, like, we need to acknowledge emotion to truly understand ourselves. We need to acknowledge the ways in which we are constantly, and again, the word sounds horrible, but it does express very well what happens, how we are constantly manipulating and being manipulated through speech, through what we express, to what we reflect, because we want other people to jump into our story. We want other people to hop on board of our views so we can feel safe within them, so we don't have to question different parts of ourselves. And then it's so good to come with the confirmation bias of, like, yeah, I'm right, and then, like, to start to feel very safe within it. And it's like something can relax, right? It's like, oh yeah, I don't have to ask myself these questions anymore. I don't have to have, like, a deep check-in, because I'm already getting outside confirmation. And then it's just like the protection or the shell becomes even more strong and more impenetrable, to the point that it is used to turn ourselves against each other. Mm-hmm. And it's very sad. The conclusion that I come is, like, we come to this extremely sad place.
Mm-hmm. It is. It's driven by the needs again. It's the basic human needs, the emotional needs. I mean, people really aren't aware. I wasn't for so long. I'm pretty emotional, but the effect that my emotions have on my logic in general. I have to wait a full emotional wave to pass before I make any decisions. I've been informed, and knowing that and having that as an anchor helps me separate when there is just an overload in the system of emotion based on a decision I have to make, or an instance that happens, and decisions made after that instance, until that has been integrated in my system, and then the brain and the body can decide on what actually aligns with a true decision that works for me on my path. And I dread to think some of the doors that I might have closed, or potentially doors that were closed on me, because of being driven in that way. And it wasn't a negative thing to be driven emotionally. I make decisions, I have a strong emotional reaction to things, and it helps me guide decisions. But I now know, 37, so it's late on to have learned these tools and strategies to, like, listen to all your bodies, listen to all the bits, try and be a bit more cohesive, try and be a little bit more holistic in how you're moving through this life. And you've got a lot of people that are one or the other. There's a lot of people who are really, really emotionally driven, but they don't understand that it's emotion that's driving these things, because there's such a lack of understanding and awareness out there for anybody to truly understand what's going on inside their body, what's going on inside this collective machine, unless you go seeking it yourself. And even then, it tends to be coming a lot later. And at that point, you can look at your own life through this view of, like, oh, feel a bit ashamed just to bring it up, like, and you can see what was driving you, and then you can get this other view of other people and see what is driving them. So if you're going to talk about massively divisive topics, then it's really, really understandable why, like, the media and the establishment, let's say, use emotion. It's not available readily. It's changing now. It's not readily available from the right age to understand yourselves, but it is understood and available to the establishment, because there is how-old literature on the emotional body and its connection with the mental, and how they're all connected. It's not actively, our societies are not built around that knowledge. They're built around this logic mind, this, like, technology-driven, factual, scientific model, and it's worked for us. but what to the detriment of us really truly understanding ourselves as humans. And then we expect us to not have this like polarized one camp versus the other camp. Not no one, that's a generalization, but like people don't have a fucking clue what's going on. No matter, they're presented with information, and if they have a lot of fear in their system, they're going to go for the safest option. If they have a lot of hatred in their system, they don't know how to get that out, they're going to go for the thing that helps them feel better about themselves and pacifies themselves in that moment. And this goes all the way up to the people that run these systems. Who's to say that they're receiving the emotional support from an appropriate age to ensure that their decisions are not emotionally driven by maybe more nefarious needs and wants and desires based on their experiences? And I genuinely believe that some of the leaders on this, my side of the world here, are going through some of the most traumatic upbringings and experiences. And just because they have the money and the fancy schools and everything, it doesn't mean that they're not subjected to the same traumas, if not, maybe not for lack of like basic needs of food and water, but they're lacking in some other things that has been proven, i.e. skin on skin contact from your mother, not being separated as a small child, being sent to boarding school, all these things that these like elites are put through in the system is just spitting out extremely emotionally traumatized adults at the end who have like decisions to make that really should have the most settled nervous system and balanced nervous system to even consider making decisions that have the impact that they have. Yet here we are. Like it's just wild to me. But
no, and I even think it's like somehow what comes is the idea of every decision should always come from an integration of all the dimensions of our being. Like everyone at the table should have a say, because in some instances it is going to be the emotional reaction that is like having the stronger say and the one that needs to be honored the most and move in that direction. Sometimes it's going to be the rational mind. Sometimes it's going to be the perspective of our soul. Like all of them are pointing in one direction, and in any given instance, like all of them are needed, but sometimes the need might be need to fed more from a certain perspective, right? But it's like how different it would be to relate from being able to integrate and recognize all of those different layers within ourselves again, and to recognize them at a conscious level. And obviously, like for leaders, that would be the most important. Like it is insane, like to really think about the amount of responsibility that is put in one being. Like no wonder those people are going to be like fully burned out, fully overwhelmed, fully dissociated. Like from which place can they really make like a good decision unless they're like super well integrated beings, which very few beings are. So, and it's like I remember like a couple of months ago I had this situation where like someone really crossed me, and I was so mad. Like I was experiencing like an anger that I hadn't in a long time, and there was like this very strong feeling coming of wanting to punish this person. And it was just like, it was in the body, it's just like everything in me was like, fucking destroy that thing. Like they crossed you, you shouldn't. And then it was very interesting for me to witness and to also allow this part of myself to come true, because at another point I would have also just like very quickly jumped towards no, just love this person, wish them the best, send them love and light, and they are just as free as you are in this situation. And just like seeing the opposition of like aspects of myself and how they were showing up in this very particular situation, this part that wanted peace and resolution, and that from a higher place could see that actually it is true that this person deserves to be free and deserves to be happy. And also to see the part of myself that it, like where something so deep had been touched, and like that really the animal body wanted wanted blood. It was just like wanted revenge. And also like seeing the rational part of myself that wanted to be diplomatic, or that at points wanted to educate the other person on why they shouldn't have like done this, and really like to give a seat at the table to all of those different parts of myself that were showing me something. And yeah, of course, it's way harder to navigate the situation like that, right? And much more uncomfortable, because then the part of me that thinks that it's so spiritual and so loving and compassionate has to face the fact that there's a part of me that it's out for blood. And then the other part that just wants to be the diplomat is just like looking at these two parts of me, just being like, what is happening? And then just like, again, sitting with all of them, and eventually just like coming with the most integrated reaction or response that I can in this moment, also without expecting any perfection from me, but noticing like, actually there's all these different aspects of myself that get awakened at any given situation. And when I'm only like allowing myself to experience reality through this specific channel, through this specific dimension, I'm also like cutting off very important information from my own growth, from my own evolution, for my own development. And yes, I feel like it's a tangent for sure, as usual, but
it's a tangent. It's always a tangent. It's always a truthful tangent, though. Like that, but you're spot on. Until all of that is, not to say there aren't people that out there can like really quickly disseminate everything that's going on in their system and respond in a way that is balanced and ready to meet that other person where they're at. Yes, there's going to be Jedis that can like move through at that pace. But it is interesting, because when you do take that step back and you do have the opportunity to, as long as there's no requirement for a really quick like interjection, if there's time to like find some resolve, allow these pieces to talk to each other, observe them, probably be horrified at some of them, and then of course there is more ability to see that person as the human that they are, and separate like the action from that. It's not to say that we're all here trying to be Buddha and bypass the realities of life, that sometimes people do shitty things, and they do shitty things for those reasons, and we're allowed to have those reactions and we're allowed to have those instances. But it's like with each opportunity for that coming to it with this more settled, more integrated way of viewing it, and hopefully that way would reduce damage in repairable situations between friends and peers. I think if we could all get to a place where we could come at most decisions that way, it would be a very, very different place to live. It would be.
Yeah, and again, because it forces yourself, like when you recognize when you recognize the discrepancies within your own system, within your own being, when you recognize your own humanity at the end of the day, it's like inevitably you're going to have to recognize that the other people are also coming from their own humanity, from their own discrepancies, from the inner battle between all the parts of themselves. And then again, it just gives you the space to truly open up to the other, instead of just like shutting yourself down in I'm right, you're wrong. And it's such a safe place. It's even like a great place to be. I mean, I just experienced myself during the weekend, just like feeling this dislike for this person, and just be like, oh, that person, like, ugh, why do they even exist? Why would anyone like them? But then it's just like, when I'm in that place, I'm only giving space to one part of myself. That feels so self-righteous. That feels so safe, because it's like, again, this black and white. I'm right, they're wrong, they should be disliked, I'm good, I should be liked. And it's like, wait a second, like, that's not true. This is like, you might be right, you're free to dislike this person, You're not free to demonize them in your dislike of them. They're not only the thing that you are judging them by. They're not only this thing that you are deeming to be so unlovable. They are lovable, and it's like, again, if you really are willing to see all the dimensions of this being, it's like, if you really believe all the spiritual stuff that you preach, and they're the very same light as you are, and in that they deserve the very same love that you do. And if you're also in touch with your animal, more emotional part, it's like they are also prey of their own emotions, where like rationality gets completely bypassed, and sometimes like really fucked up decisions get made. So like, relate to all of it, and then you have a full picture. And then from that, if like, have the courage to still tell me that this person is like a unlovable motherfucker, whatever things you want to call it. It's like, and I mean, and the word might not even courage, but it's like there's no ground for it anymore. There's no way that this is that you can come to that conclusion anymore. Even taking the most heinous human being, even taking the 20-year-olds that murdered their mom and their dad. Just like, yeah, that's despisable. Like, the act is despisable, but is it all that they are? Does this define them completely? And do we rob them off of any other like aspects of themselves just because they did this horrible thing? And again, this is not to say like, oh, we shall forgive them, they're marvelous, like, praise be. But to, again, it goes both ways. It's like, to open up to others like that necessarily means that we are opening up to ourselves like that. And it's fucking uncomfortable. It's not, because it's not the safety of the known, of the I am this, you are that. It's like you were saying, also this dynamic reality. And I know you were using another word, but in which we are free to fluctuate. We are free to be flaky.
Free to be flaky, free to change your mind, and there'd be no embarrassment in changing your mind based on evolution of your beliefs or evolution of your knowledge base, or like actually touching base with humans who can show you just their experience without trying to convert you to whatever it is that they believe in, and having those conversations and saying, I have a wider view of this now. I have a wider view of this. I also find it's really interesting when you start to have wider views on really polarized situations, is that having that wider view is almost not allowed either. And it's like I said about being in the middle, is you're this kind of bypasser that doesn't want to make a decision. You just want to sit on the fence because you see both sides so clearly, and it's like you're not even allowed to really sit there. And I know that there's an archetype that sits there comfortably because the lack of ability to choose because of whatever is going on in their systems. Like there's a real archetype of person that does sit there in this almost like lazy, doesn't learn enough about this side or that side, and just there's a lack of care or like need to be involved, a very removed part. But there are genuine people that are learned enough, that are understanding the way that things work. They're able to take their emotion out of another person's viewpoint, and they become more centralized, both in themselves and with their worldviews. And it must be difficult for them to exist in some circles as well, because of the us versus them, pick a side. You can't be neither or both. Sometimes you can be neither or both, and sometimes you can be both, neither, and then one side. Like, that's cool. It's totally fine. Yeah, it's just really interesting. It does come right back down to religion. We spoke about religion before we came into this room to have this to record, and it just seems so prevalent in all these different institutions across. Just very, very divisive in that it serves, but hopefully it will be on the change, because I do think, the fact that we've just done this course on emotion, that there are more healers in the space, that there's a wider mainstream access to information on how they work, how they sit in your system, how they can impact your health in various different ways. I think that is becoming more and more available. And I do believe that younger people are focusing on not just their physical body, but the other health areas that they have a control of, you know, so that they can understand and that they can have an impact on the health there as well. So I do think that it is changing, but there's a lot to be undone and there's a lot to be unlearned, I think. And it's exactly it, unlearned. You're not really allowed to unlearn something once you learn it, because it's like, people have a funny view on it, but like unlearning it's actually harder than learning something, because you have to remove your stories too. You have to remove your attachment of emotion and story to unlearn something, especially something that's really, really widespread and mainstream, like a religion. Let's use that as an example, or a political belief, if we're going to go back to the American thing. Unlearning what you believe to be true just has its own dissolving effect on who am I really. I had a lot of these beliefs in my persona. These are who I thought I was, you know. So there's a lot of that comes through the looking inward.
Yeah, again, it's so vulnerable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's the shittiest, most controversial like view, there's a part that feels safe in standing in that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to place ourselves also in the unknown, to place ourselves in uncertainty, and be like, it's true, I might not know. And also there's another part that might be cautious, because some people take advantage of that. Because again, the people that still cannot hold the place of nuance, the place of uncertainty, the place of openness, will use it as a gateway to lure you into their reality.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, this is always like what we started with, like how we are luring people into our reality with our story. And it just takes a lot of standing in our own ground, in our own knowing, again, at all the dimensions, like starting in the knowing, like standing in the knowing of our body and like how the body wants to relate to this. And then in the knowing of the mind, like what are the stories that our own mind is feeding us around it, like how we are able to relate to it from the concepts that we have already acquired, from the truths that we deem to be true. And then like standing at the level of the soul, where there's like just a movement towards a higher evolution, towards a more broad seeing, and then just inviting them all. And they're just like being so grounded in ourselves, and just like also not caving in without having to take another person down, right? Which is also so hard. It's so hard to be like, I see where you're coming from. I see your truth. I see your beliefs, your experience, and I don't take it, but I don't deny it, because it's true for you.
Mm-hmm.
I think also like a lot of times, because we come from a place of denying another person's reality, which is so violent, and which inevitably is going to create another layer of protection. Yeah, like how hard it is to speak in this openness without getting lost in it.
Yeah, and you don't want to show yourself as weak, exactly, because other people will prey on that from the shadow of, this person says they don't know, this person may be uneducated, they're probably uneducated in other areas as well, therefore maybe they're weak, like an easy target. And there's accolades in these societies now of who's the most certificates, with the most knowledge base, is the most revered. And there's a beauty to that, because some people have dedicated their lives to like learning just one thing and they're the master at it. So it doesn't serve to say, oh, I don't know, or I don't have knowledge in that area, because again, it shows you up as having a weakness. But I think there's actually a massive strength in admitting that you don't know, because I think there's a lot of pressure on us. The amount of times that I've not really known where I sit with something, but I've said one thing or the other, countless. countless times, and maybe I just didn't have the trust in myself to say that I didn't know, or the trust in myself that I wouldn't be rejected by saying that I didn't know, and I needed to show that I had more understanding for a topic or whatever at the time. So it was like that blending in, don't be rejected kind of thing. And then of course the fear of people thinking, should not read the papers, like
seen as a sign of weakness, huh?
Mm-hmm.
When people are standing in the not known, which is funny because from a spiritual perspective, it's the highest place to be. There's even like a story that was coming to my mind, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but I mean, it's very simple. It was just like someone was asking, I don't know, let's give an example of like, oh, what is God to you? And then the person answered like, I don't know. And the teacher answered, not knowing is the most beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Because like in not knowing, like all the possibilities are contained. But again, it takes like huge vulnerability to stand in the not knowing and be like, everything is welcome. Everything is invited. Everything holds a piece of the truth, because that is also true. Even the thing that you're like will stand against, there's something in it that holds truth. Otherwise, it wouldn't have like any ground to stand on and to like continue. So there is some truth. And like again, it is very scary to stand in this place, right? Or to stand in the place where you have to correct yourself like every couple of months of like, oh well, 2 months ago I would have come here and told you this as if it was the most important thing in the world. And you know what? I have kept evolving. I have kept growing. I have kept opening up to life as it is, and I don't find this to be true anymore. It's fucking scary. And again, we're like societally, we're not given permission to do that. Then we become these flaky ones. Then we become to the ones that are not to be trusted. From the perspective of the soul, there's no other way. It's like if you are not like challenging the very same notion that you had 2 years ago, like, are you even growing? Are you even going anywhere? And I see that, I see that in myself. And sometimes it comes with shame, which I'm like, sometimes I come here and I say things that maybe 2 weeks ago I would have said something completely different. And then it's just like, I just sit with my like very convinced face of like, this is how it is. It's so important to feel emotions. Well, like 2 years ago, I would have told you like, don't go into it. They're not the self. They're not like the final reality, or however, like they're not the, I don't know, the word's not coming, but you know what I'm trying to say. They're not the ultimate reality. So yes. Like, don't even engage. And now it's just like I have had to trace back within myself and be like, actually, I feel like emotions are super important and they are a vital expression of this ultimate reality and they should be engaged with. And it is true for me right now. That might change. In another 2 years, I might come and tell you a completely different story. And maybe this is a part where we also have to like detach of the part of ourselves that wants to convince others to join us in our reality so we can feel safe or we can be confirmed in what it is so important for us right now, and be like, it is fundamental for me to feel emotions right now, and that's enough. Whoever wants to hop on board with me and also feel, amazing. Whoever's not ready, they're in their own journey, they're hopefully living their own truth, and like respect to that, because that might change in a moment, as this what I'm going through might change in a moment, and be like, okay, it's so dynamic, right? And this part that always wants to like place itself in a certain view, in a certain belief, it's a way in which we're sadly cutting ourselves off from this dynamic.
No, I completely agree. And it's funny you said about the 2 years ago you would have been aligned with witness the emotion, don't connect with it entirely, allow it to wash past. And now we're in the place where emotion should be felt. I agree with you. that we're sitting with them, we're understanding, and we're allowing them, and we're witnessing the power that they have. Had we not gone into such and all of us collectively an upbringing that really, I know there's pockets of the world that you don't suppress the way that we do emotions, and they do have a deep understanding of their service to us, but we generally are relearning that, right? So perhaps in an ideal world, we wouldn't need to move into the feeling and processing of them to allow them to move out of our realms. By healing them and missing them, we are moving closer to where you said you were 2 years ago, of once you've cleared out all of this suppression and all of these stories and all this conditioning that is in relation to your invalidation of your emotion in the first place, maybe we can take this step back. Like maybe there is a second evolution of now I watch them fly by, right? But I just don't think any of us really have that ability until they've been felt. Like they're in there, they're in our systems, and all of the bodies are connected in such a way that if one is out of kilter, i.e. emotional body, it needs to be fed and nurtured and loved and held and witnessed. And maybe with enough of that, we can shake up that body, and then we can get to a place of, I allow this to wash past me. This doesn't have a story it connects to. It doesn't drag me in any way. There's no anger here. I'm not going to collapse for 2 days because someone has disrespected my mom. Like these, So again, it's just really interesting because it's almost like circular, and I expect to change my beliefs massively in the next couple of years. I hope so.
Yeah, and I think also what you said, like again, stands true for relating to others. It's like we want to judge others as if they were living in our own experience. So it's like we want to rob other people of their own experience of like, how can they have voted for Trump, or how have they have voted for Kamala, or like this, as if they have the felt experience of what it was in that person's reality, and from which that configuration, that decision, that view of the world came about. It's like until we don't have that information, which is like experience, like felt information, then we can never like judge another person's decision, another person's perspective, because we have just not been through what they have. It's like it's the alchemy of experience. And like the moment you step into that experience and you're like, oh shit, now I see. If you step into that experience from a place of openness, because a lot of times it's like life is always trying to show us, right? It's like, let me put this in your way to see if now you'll see, if now you'll open. And a lot of times we just like, no. But when we are actually allowing it, it's just like giving us such an alchemical process of like, okay, now you actually understand, now you actually see, and something that you maybe, again, 2 years ago, wouldn't have had the ground to relate to because it was just not in your experience. You're like, okay, I see. And I can really feel where that person was coming from. I just didn't have the data before, like you said, to relate to that. But not the logical, like rational data, but like the embodied data of, oh, wow, that's what it feels like to go through this. And from there, yeah, I see. I would have made a completely different decision. I would have taken completely different steps. And it's always... It's so important, again, to give ourselves that possibility, because in giving ourselves that possibility, like we're giving it to everyone else, at least in how we're starting to open up to relate to them and to perceive them and to hold them in their own freedom, right? Of just journeying through life in whichever way they are meant to journey through life.
Yeah, and it reminds me of back to the right and wrong. It's just so simplified. To view someone having more experience in your life, you can have a much more sort of deep understanding for someone and not seek this I'm right, they're wrong mentality. And it obviously takes a long time to move out of the right and wrong. There's only one right way, there's only one wrong way to do things. But it's understandable it's drummed into our system because of this like scientific based education system that we all come up through of there is a right answer and all other answers are wrong. Or there are a couple of right answers because the textbook says, but all other interpretations of the subject are wrong. And again, it's like the unlearning, but you're absolutely right. It's to see someone in their complete humanness and actually be able to relate to them and understand at a much, much deeper level. But again, that comes with the changing of your own mind and the changing of the stories in your system, that then you can relate to that person. So again, it's like a shedding, but then a relayering to get that connection. So it's just like, it just feels like a constant shedding and rebuilding and then shedding and then rebuilding, but hopefully with actual connection at the source of it and the end goal. Yeah, really interesting.
Yeah, I think what my closure would be is like ultimately the invitation, would be to witness yourself as we were trying to pull you into our own story, consciously or unconsciously, right?
Yeah.
It's just, it's always an invitation to this witnessing of ourselves, to see how we are able to relate to anything at any given moment, where it takes us, what it awakens in us, which parts of us like create contraction and rejection, which parts of the story all of a sudden bring us to empathy and openness, and yeah, like just seeing ourselves how we are taking on little journeys from it, and because of our own experience, how some parts will attach and some parts will not, and from there we come to a conclusion, right? Because we could have said 10,000 things in this podcast, and if you came all the way to the end, maybe you live with one thing because it's the one thing that had somewhere to attach to in yourself, and everything else was just dismissed. And it's okay, so I think we have come to an end
conclusion.
It's good luck listening, people.
Who cares? It's going out.
Freedom to be flaky. It's a wrap.